The first one that's popping up in alphabetical order is the Arcbound Ravager. Now, it didn't do the original one from... it's not the original artwork from the Dark Steel run. This is from the Modern Masters set. And I love Arcbound Ravager. That card is a mainstay in my Modern Affinity deck. I didn't play that. There's a time I took a break from playing Magic between Darksteel and probably Shards of Alara. So there was a chunk in there. I can say I've played for 20 years. I've over the course of 20 years I've played. I did take a break. I went to school, started a family, and all this other fun stuff. But anyway, I got back in, and I had read up on how Magic was almost destroyed by the whole Dark Steel, Fifth Dawn, Mirrodin block the first time around, but then they made it better and somehow actually have a good deck out of it. But yeah, Arcbound Ravager is my buddy, and he definitely will win you some games. If not, he'll throw his counters at other folks if you need to as well. If you're not familiar with the card, you can type !card and the card name in chat, and my lovely little bots will bring up the card rules text on that. So let's try that right now. Arcbound. Yeah, right there. So it's an artifact creature, comes in as a 0/0, but it comes with a counter on it, and then you get a counter. You can put a counter on it when you sack a artifact to it. That's the big tricky with that is to kill with an infect combo in the Modern Affinity deck. Is you activate your Inkmoth Nexus. You sacrifice, get a bunch of counters on this guy. You sacrifice himself to himself. Seems kind of counterintuitive, but that's how that works. And then the counters will be placed. You can place another counters onto another artifact creature, which would be your Inkmoth Nexus. And then you swing for flying infect. That seems pretty good sometimes. All right, another one he did was one of the versions for the Eternal Masters. Let's see how the oldest one he's done for that one. Looks like this is actually a hail back to our buddy from the other night. We did look at Mark Poole's work because he did the original artwork for Balance, but starting with a Judge gift promo in 2004, they started using his artwork for Balance. This is Kev Walker again, and it seems pretty good when you're trying to keep the game even and under control. I hadn't played too much Balance because it's definitely a very niche card to deal with if you want like that. And let's try. If I can spell correctly, that'd be even better, right? There we go. Let's see. The next one, Bladewing the Risen. I know that it was one of the original. Actually, originally came out in Scourge, but they started using it a lot in the when the Commander became a staple format, because it's a dragon legend, which was required for being a commander, and it's a dragon. People love dragons. Did a lot of tribal stuff with it, and yeah. Let's see, what shall be next? Bump in the Night. I remember that one. This one was pretty popular during Innistrad, And let me get that guy up there. The artwork is kind of creepy. It was a super cheap damage, and it was basically it wasn't a lightning bolt, but you could use it the same way, because usually the black mono black, maybe even black red at that time, did have trouble just getting it over the top, closing the deal, and you could just draw that card, and since it had flashback, you could flash it back for red. So by the end of the game, you could easily have 7 mana. So for that 7 mana, you can reduce their player's life by 6. And that usually means dead in some cases. Now we're not even through the seas, and we are already at the end of the first page. All right, here's another one that I used a bit. Is City of Traitors. I played in Legacy. When I did play, it was a mud deck. I think I've mentioned that before, and this was definitely one of the big guys that would get your power out your mana and power out your creatures pretty quickly, because granted, once you play it, you can't play another land without sacrificing it, but usually at one point you've played enough land and that's all you'll ever need. And so 2 colorless mana for 1 card is pretty good. And that was that one, and Ancient Tomb were the 2 big ones for that. Let's see, well, he did a version of the modern version of Clone. This one is from the 9th edition, the 9th edition and on. I always enjoyed this one. This was definitely my my Timmy moments. Because, hey, for 4, you can copy whatever's out on the board. You can copy their biggest dude and their biggest threat. And you can get, basically, instead of killing it, you could just have them have to deal with a giant creature that is just like one of theirs. Never really got it to work in any of my decks, because it didn't really fit the deck too well. But it was definitely my Timmy side of things. He's also responsible for Council's Judgement. When they first started coming out with the conspiracy cards. Let me spell this right here first, real quick. It definitely added a new twist and element to the game. The will of the council was the key word, and it actually brought in a different flavor to the game, where you could vote on which creature that you don't control goes into exile. And I believe with the will of the council, if there was a tie, the person who cast the card automatically wins. So this was basically any card gets exiled. And I believe since it doesn't target, I could be totally wrong. Any rules lawyers wants to let me know. Since it doesn't target, I believe that you could pretty much target anything. And it was really used a lot in some legacy decks to do that, to get rid of just whatever, some things that you couldn't really deal with that well. Here's the big boy that I was mentioning earlier, Damnation. It's and this is a kind of a term that the regeneration is a term that they're not really using too much anymore. But it was basically an effect where you could, sometimes the creature had to pay a mana cost, had to do something else to regenerate a creature, and that made it pretty much indestructible for that turn. Now, if you could kill it before the regeneration trigger ended, then that's a different story. But this is definitely something that'll wipe the board for 2 black. You can kill absolutely everyone in the room. And in the newer version, when they no longer used the Wrath of God, they started bringing out the Day of Judgment. Now it looks like he did a promo for Zendikar release, and I think that might be the artwork that they were using for here and there. They've mixed it up a bit. It seems like it's between that and the original other artist. Then that's a pretty sweet looking card there. Now that's what they changed Wrath of God to, is now Day of Judgment, pretty much. When I started playing, my favorite deck was a squirrel deck. And I wanted this card so bad for my squirrel deck. This is the Deranged Hermit. And it does squirrel stuff. When it comes into play, you put in 4 1/1 green squirrel tokens, and then he's also a squirrel lord. So he gives all squirrels +1/+1. A combination of this, an acorn nest, and some other stuff definitely made that a thing. Another fun card that was the bane of my existence during the Return to Ravnica ages was Detention Sphere. It was rough because I played a lot of Pakrat at that time, and basically, since everything's a copy of a copy, you'd name Detention Sphere when you put it out, and it would take all of your rats. All the rats go bye-bye. It was bad. So you had to make sure that they didn't have a Detention Sphere, especially if they're playing blue-white, which was the control deck of the time. Then you'd have to deal with that guy. Let's see. In the Journey to Nyx, this guy came out once in a while, but when I was playing Mono Black, I think he was the top end guy. And so he basically brings it in, and every time enchantments come out, all their creatures get -1/-1. So it's definitely taken out some of their little weenie soldier guys. That is a Doomwake Giant. Did he do the original one? All right, he did the original artwork on this one for a Dragon Speaker Shaman. Never really got too much use out of that from both the Scourge time when it was first released, or when it was re-released again in the Commander decks. But it was again one card for your dragon deck. All your dragon spells cost 2 less to cast. That's pretty good. That is really good. See, now when I think of Magic artwork, this is sort of what I think of. It's nothing too crazy. It doesn't look like a photograph. It's not too cartoony. It definitely evokes the ideas that all these crazy monsters and dragons do exist. So it was definitely, I like his work a lot. Let's see, what another card. Speaking of one of the cards that we need to work with, and we're trying to get, is this guy. That's Field of the Dead. And for anyone not in the know, this is the new hotness with the Scapeshift deck that I'm actually trying to work on. It sort of works like, if anyone is around during, or still does it in Modern, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. It sort of works the same way, but you have to have 7 more lands of different names. And every time you play another land, it makes a 2/2 zombie. So you play enough game to get out your 7 lands, and then you can sacrifice it with Scapeshift and play this guy, and you can get out tons, because you get about 2 of these guys and a couple of different ones, and you can just make all sorts of zombies. All right, we're into the G's now. What is a good one? All right, we're always having fun with the goblin stuff. Here's one that I rather enjoy. Goblin Grenade. And basically, he's just doing a little exploding. And because we have to sacrifice a goblin when you play this spell, and it does 5 damage. So you can take these little 1/1 goblins like we saw in that last match and kill up to a 5 power creature with it. Did he do the original Gush? He did. Okay, Gush was also a big one. I didn't play too much of the blue at the time when this came out, in Merdian Masks, and is basically a card draw. People love card draw, and I believe either it just was recently banned or is banned in Pauper, because that's freaking huge. So it's 5, but you can return 2 islands to your hand and then play it instead. So that's huge for being for a card draw spell. Getting 2 cards for just returning 2 lands to your hand, that's pretty good. Especially with some of those games like High Tide and stuff like that, where it requires a lot of lands to do that. It'll have extras laying around. He did one of the let's see, what else did he do? Oh, he did the Jace versus Chandra Planeswalker Jace Bellerin art. This is pretty sweet. It's kind of a semi not anime, but makes Jace look like kind of a badass. And he's angry about something, but that's a cool card. That was in part of the Jace and Chandra dual decks. At one point I actually tried to build all the dual decks just by buying all the little pieces, because I was a member of a couple of different Magic card trading websites, and so a lot of people didn't really want the dual deck versions of a lot of cards. So I was like, hey, I built like 3 or 4 of them, just saying, okay, give me this card and this card and this card and this card. And I think Jason versus Chandra was one of them, because it costs more to buy it as a whole kit than it did to buy it in his individual pieces. So I built those 2 decks just by taking that trading cards and getting them in separately like that. The next one is a Kitchen Finks. This was a pretty popular one for some of the modern decks that I saw that had I believe it was part of the, I'm not sure if it was part of the Splinter Twin deck. No, They might have been part of the Infect deck, I believe, the Kitchen Finks, because they would definitely play, or whoever played Malira, one of those decks. So Malira says that your creatures can have counters put on them. And these guys, when they die, would normally come back with a -1/-1 counter on it and make it a 2/1 the second time around. But since they can't put counters on it, they become a 3/2 as well. It gains 2 life, and then you win. No, that was yeah, that might have been in this. I don't even know anymore. If somebody remembers what the Kitchen Finks were used for, then we'll see how that, if my brain works on that. Back to the squirrel stuff. I know that he did. This was part of my squirrel deck that I did. This is the Corrosion Beast, and his creature type is a squirrel. Doesn't look anything like a squirrel, but he's a squirrel beast. And then Threshold, a lot of Odyssey stuff dealt with graveyard card quantity, and once you got Threshold, he became an 8/8 for 4. That's pretty nuts. So he was definitely part of his squirrel stuff, because then if you had your Deranged Hermit out, he would become a 9/9 for being a squirrel there. It's a huge squirrel. It's a huge squirrel. If you do play, I believe this is still played in Modern, but if you do play the anything Jeskai, anything red-white in Modern, you definitely know the Lightning Helix. It was sort of a play or a reimagining of the Lightning Bolt, but it gave you a white side of it to gain life. So half of it's bolt, half of it's life gain, and that's all fun. Okay, let's see. He also did some of the older versions of Land War Elves. He did some for, I believe, the M12, M11 Land War Elves. And if you definitely need some schooling on that, on what a Land War Elf does, definitely check out any green-based or green-based deck in current standard, as they'll find you. They'll show you how that little Land War Elf works. And they'll probably end up ramping to nose end. Let's see. We're into the M's now. Oh, that's a good one. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. So, back when I started doing Commander, my buddy made a mono red Commander deck. It included this card called Obliterate. Because I always ask him, I'm like, so if you're playing red, how do you deal with creatures? Because you're just gonna be throwing a lot of burn around, maybe some red creatures, maybe some dragons. He goes, don't worry, I got the Obliterate right here. So every time you need to wipe the board, that's what it did. It just killed everybody, and it couldn't have been countered. So any blue players are like, nope. We're not going to deal with that one at all. It's kind of funny how I was mentioning Pakrat earlier, because I didn't remember that he also did the artwork for Pakrat, because he did the artwork for the Detention Sphere that dealt with the Pakrat. And as soon as I guess you have to do both sides of your problem and your solution there. So if you ever played mono black, or even played any kind of Magic, tournament Magic, around the time of Return to Ravnica block, Theros block, you probably were either playing Pakrat or were beaten by Pakrat multiple times. I myself was on the playing side, and I actually did pretty well with a lot of tournaments to do that. Another card that I used in either a combination of my my Mud deck in Legacy or my Artifact deck in our Affinity deck in Modern was the Phyrexian Revoker here. Yeah, he looks like a nice little bug, but he basically, when he comes into play, you can name a non-land card, and then activated abilities of that card's name cannot be used. A lot of folks use that for trying to deal with Splinter Twin or some other things like that. I think also it dealt with Planeswalkers pretty nicely, so you could just name the Planeswalker and it wouldn't you couldn't use it anymore. Another card that I used in my green-based decks, it's probably been since the dawn of time, is Rancor. And if you were playing against this guy, you had to be super careful about it, because if you didn't time it just right, then it would just come right back to their hand, right back onto a creature, and then right back into your face. Because when the creature that this enchants dies, Rancor, the enchantment, goes back to your hand. So you can just play it again on something else. And you just keep playing it and playing it again. Let's see. Alright, he also did some art, which he probably didn't do one of the original ones. He also did some artwork for a Sengir Vampire. This is a classic card that has been around since almost the dawn of Magic. And so basically he embodies the flavor of a vampire. When he himself does damage to a creature and it dies, he gets stronger, so he gets a +1/+1 counter on it, and that will definitely kind of make him a little scarier and a little harder to deal with there. When one of the sets that I missed the first time around, but I did get to see it in Modern, was the Future Sight stuff. I did miss the first part of the Planeswalkers, and I also did miss these packed cards the first time. See, basically, when this first came out, they had to say on the card that this spell is black, mainly because it didn't have a casting cost. And that's what gives the spell its identity, is the color symbols in its casting cost. But when it has nothing, then it doesn't have a color leanings. But they've now since announced that there's a different way of marking that on the card. But you can destroy a non-black creature, but you have to pay for the spell your next turn. So, but if you don't do that, you just lose the game. That's it. Game over. So you could be completely tapped out and then kill their creature and still make it to the next turn and be able to move on with your next turn. But you're down 3 mana from the previous turn. It's still a pretty nice card in the Modern scene there. Trying to find some other stuff here that I've played with or remember. Did he do the original Volrath Stronghold? Yes, he did. At one point I had a modern deck, not a modern deck, a commander deck that had a lot of creature recursion. I think I had Chainer as my legendary commander, and I used this card to sort of do some graveyard recursion. It can work as just a regular colorless mana, but then you can also put a creature from your graveyard on top of your library. So I was doing a lot of sacrificing for one reason or another, then for a black and a colorless and a black, and then you can get that creature right back on top of your library. It was pretty sweet. Pissed off a lot of people, but that's usually what I like doing most of the time in Commander, is just ticking people off. And to sort of bring it around, did he? I don't think he did the original one on this one. Starting with the 7th edition, he's also responsible for the good side. I don't know if it could be considered a good side of that. This is the Wrath of God from his artwork, and that's the white. Destroy all creatures; they cannot be regenerated. So, if you ever noticed this, I'm sure most folks have, because that's it's almost pretty much part of Magic lore, and you can. Let me get. I'm trying to do a side by side here to show you how that all goes together. Oh, apparently my window's gone a little wanky. Oh, we need that print in the Wrath. There we go. So you got your Wrath of God on the left, and then you got where are we? And then you got your damnation. If I can get that coming up here. Anybody? Bueller. There we are. And then you got your oh, it's going to change both of them. Oh no. That's so it's basically the same thing, just the black version, the white version. They both did the same thing, wiped out everything on the board, and he's responsible for the artwork on both of them. And my favorite part is you can actually see, if you look at it, some of the little peoples just getting sucked up into this black hole, and there's actually some pretty good details as to everything going into that the black abyss.